John, if you did have one episode left of Cobra Kai, one special episode, and you could cast one current Mets player in the show, who would it be and why from this Mets team?
Ooh, that's tough. I mean, it's a really good question. First I thought Jesse Winker,
Oh yeah,
just because he's
yes.
I like his personality. You never know what you're going to get. There's going to be something unpredictable. He's got a good look. So I think he was the first name that popped into my head.
What's up, everybody? Welcome to the Mets Pod presented by Tri-State Cadillac. Spring is the season for new beginnings, and it's the best time to get behind the wheel of a sophisticated new Cadillac SUV. Visit your Tri-State Cadillac dealer today. I'm your host, Connor Rogers, joined as always by my co-host, Joe DeMeo. But let's be real, who cares about him when we have Jon Hurwitz joining the show, co-creator and showrunner of Cobra Kai, also the co-creator of the Harold and Kumar franchise, American Reunion, Obliterated, and many others. And most importantly, John, the best part is a die-hard Mets fan. Thanks so much for joining us. How are you today?
I am happy to be here, and I do care about Joe. I'm a big fan, and I was very excited and proud of the work that he did last night during the Spring Breakout game.
As were we, and we're going to get into that, Joe. Don't you worry. It was a lot of fun watching that and seeing you in the booth calling a game. So listen, John, we got to spend time together down in Port St. Lucie. Is that a normal trip for you? How often do you get to go to spring training with you and your family?
I hope it becomes a normal trip. This was our very first time. I've been a Mets fan pretty much all my life since I was maybe 6 years old. I've instilled it in my daughter. I've got my younger daughter. It hasn't quite gotten the bug yet, but I'm working on it. But my first daughter, her name is Elizabeth. Her middle name is Shay. So I got in there early, and it's been a source of pride for her. But the trip was incredible. Just being there, it was. This year we felt after last season's run and sort of how special that was, and with us signing Juan Soto, we wanted to be there to see Juan Soto with his very first at bat. And we definitely saw a good one.
John, we're all friends here, so you could be totally honest with us. What was more fun, spending time with me and Connor or watching Juan Soto's first at bat in a Mets uniform when he hit a home run?
Well, the fact that you called it was what I think was what made the home run special. I mean, I enjoyed the entire trip. That moment was just mayhem and total excitement. But it was great to see you guys down there. And my daughter did make an appearance on Mets Pod before I did, and my nephew, my brother-in-law, we all watched your live show, and everyone had a great time.
And I believe she had a question about Brandon Sproat. If everybody's wondering just how deep in Mets fandom the Hurwitz family is right now, that was one of the best questions we had at the spring training show. John, before we get too deep into Mets, and we have a lot to talk about with them, especially this offseason, we wanted to ask you some quick questions about your work. You guys obviously just wrapped up a really successful run of Cobra Kai season 6. What was it like ending that show after such a long run, creatively, but also emotionally?
It was emotional. Creatively, it was fulfilling, I'll say. It's not every day that you get to do 6 seasons of a TV series these days. And for us to be able to finish what we started and bring our characters to logical conclusions that are hopefully satisfying and more than that for fans was really great. Emotionally, when you're in the work, it's hard to be emotional. It's funny. It's like when some of the players talk about, postseason baseball, you're in it and focused. I mean, when you talked about Lindor last year being so calm and just focused on winning the games that he had nothing to celebrate yet. I kind of felt that way during the work. And now I look back on it and I'm proud of the work that we did. And, a little sad that I'm not heading to Atlanta where we film the show to do another season.
Connor mentioned a bunch of the shows and movies and things that you've worked on. One that didn't make the list up there was the movie Blockers, which I'm personally a huge fan of. And I am a huge wrestling fan, so I need to know. This is just for me. Maybe some people care, maybe they don't. But this one's for me. How was it working with John Cena, who is just very, very mean to me and all the wrestling fans on Raw?
He was the best. I mean, he was literally a dream come true for a filmmaker. Our director on that movie, Kay Cannon, was the coach. And these wrestlers are used to having coaches. They're used to, a lot of them are former football players or high school wrestlers. They know what it's like to have a coach and take direction. I've directed plenty of actors over the years, and many of them are amazing. But John was as good as it got when it came to how he treated everybody on set and how he behaved. So I'm sorry that he's maybe turned heel recently, but on the set of Blockers, he was only had the face turn there.
John, if you did have one episode left of Cobra Kai, one special episode, and you could cast one current Mets player in the show, who would it be and why from this Mets team?
Ooh, that's tough. I mean, it's a really good question. First I thought Jesse Winker, just because he's
Yes.
I like his personality. You never know what you're going to get. There's going to be something unpredictable. He's got a good look. So I think he was the first name that popped into my head.
Growing up in New Jersey, you mentioned you've been a Mets fan since the age of 6. How'd your Mets fanhood come to be? Are your parents fans? Like how did it all come together for you?
It's funny because I was born in New Jersey. Then I lived outside of Pittsburgh for 7 years, from first through seventh grade. And right in the middle of that is when the '86 World Series happened. And both my parents are actually from the Bronx, New York, and they were Yankee fans growing up. But my dad has always been a fan of whatever New York team is good at the time. He doesn't have the patience to be the diehard that I am in certain ways. He's like, I've got enough stresses in my life. I turn to sports for enjoyment. So any place that he's ever lived, he'll support the team as long as they're good at the time. And that the Mets were good. So at the time when I'm becoming a Mets fan, it's 1986. It's the best of times for the Mets. So I got into it then. So it was tough because the Mets and Pirates had a real rivalry back then. So I would go to Three Rivers Stadium wearing my mini Doc Gooden jersey, and just show up there and have grown men, yelling at me and cursing me out, and I gave it back to them. So I was learning how to be a New York sports fan even there. And then I moved back to New Jersey in 8th grade, and it was smooth sailing there with a lot of other Mets fans around me.
So it's safe to say Doc definitely makes this list, but who were some of your favorite players, not even from that era, John, but could be from that era, but the last couple of decades of being a Mets fan?
I mean, Doc was obviously number one. Edgardo Alfonso was a huge one for me. I just loved his all-around game. I loved it, the Matt Harvey, Noah Syndergaard, Jacob deGrom. Obviously, that whole era was really fun. David Wright, how can anyone not like him? The Wright and Reyes years. Beltran was phenomenal, and I'm loving this current team. I mean, this current team. Pete has been a favorite of mine for a long time now. During some dark times, he brought some joy to us, and I'm just glad he's sticking around to be part of something special right now.
You mentioned Juan Soto and how you and your family just really wanted to be there for his first at bat and first appearance as a Met. Where were you, and what was your reaction when you found out that Juan Soto actually picked the Mets?
I was at my house in Los Angeles. It was one of those things where I, like many fans out there, was just constantly checking social media forever. And I did it all off season with Pete as well. So it was just that there was never like a comfortable time during the off season until Pete was signed. But up until then, it's like the Soto race. What's going to happen here? And I remember being in my house. I was walking from my kitchen to my hallway, and I saw it pop up on my phone. It was the Jeff Passan tweet. And I yelled to my daughter, Elizabeth, I said, Soto's a Met. And she ran downstairs, and we were just running around the house, screaming and yelling and jumping around. There's a little bit of a Hurwitz family tradition of, like, if a big home run happens, there's a lot of dancing that happens there. I'm not much of a dancer, except for when a Met hits a home run and when I'm encouraged by my daughter. So there might have been some, maybe the Running Man came out, maybe some Roger Rabbit, all the old moves busted out as if I was in a bar mitzvah, 30 years ago.
It's good to know you were just like us, John, at home, endlessly refreshing Twitter, just praying it was going to be the Mets. I feel like Joe and I, when we did the podcast that night at like midnight, we were like, I don't know if we're going to be able to sleep through this one. It was kind of the adrenaline you get for the rest of the week. So Speaking of that kind of adrenaline, this past Sunday, Mets Spring Breakout game, Joe got a little bit of that TV adrenaline as all the big prospects were in this game through the Mets system. We got to see Joe on the SMY call alongside Steve Gelbs, Jim Duquette. It was a lot of fun to watch. And John, listen, you are a professional producer, director, showrunner. We need a little help here breaking how this went. We know you got to watch a little bit. You got to see Joe in a suit, a rarity. I'm not going to lie. The only time I've seen Joe in a suit was at my wedding. So this was the second time I got to see Joe in a suit. How was the fit? How did he do? How was the energy? Can we get the producer's breakdown of Joe on SMY?
I think Joe was phenomenal. He was everything that he needed to be. He was knowledgeable. That's first and foremost for me as a fan. I'm looking for someone who actually has the goods and knows what they're talking about. And I know that when I'm listening to your show and when I saw him on there, I knew that I was going to get the real deal with all these players. I thought, the suit, of course, it was a sharp dressed man. So that was good, but it was a good game. And it was good to hear his voice throughout that broadcast.
Now, John said how I look good. I appreciate it. Connor, that was the same suit I wore to your wedding, so that's why it may have looked familiar to you.
It's your best suit.
John, how about my just overall performance? How would you grade that?
I think it was... I would say you were probably a B+. And the only reason I'm going to say B+ is because there needs to be room to grow. For me, you gave me everything that I needed as a fan. I liked, there was, I think, Joe, was it your story about the eggs?
Yes.
So more of that, more of those little tidbits.
We need more people to do crazy things like that for me to bring up as stories.
That was great.
Exactly. Well, encourage it. You maybe just, bring around some cartons of eggs and, force feed some of the players next time.
John, looking ahead to this season, there's been so much fun to talk about this offseason. We talked about the moment Soto came back, even Pete, after a lot of drama, being back with this team. And of course, this is all kind of on the heels of a great run this team went on in the fall that I don't think any Mets fan was prepared for those kinds of theatrics. I think we believed in the team with what they did in the second half of the season. So what are you looking forward to most now? Joe and I joke about it, but we're also not joking. It's different when the bar is set higher. There's expectations for this team going into this year that I don't think existed last year. So as a fan, what are you most excited about?
The thing I'm definitely most excited about is seeing Juan Soto play every day. That's the first and foremost thing. And we've gotten a taste of it during spring training, and watching his at-bats and just watching the difference there is of him as a player, wearing your uniform. That's something that is the number one thing that I'm looking forward to this year. I'm really curious to see if any of our young players are going to take a step forward. Vientos was amazing last year. Swaggy V is very popular in the Hurwitz household. And, I loved how that kind of came a little bit out of nowhere. It was unexpected exactly what happened there. So I'm curious to see, will this be a year where Beatty takes a step forward? Will Acuna, show what he was able to do at the end of last season wasn't a mirage, and that his AAA performance was, because of, not seeing the ball as well there. Because I know that he's commented on that kind of thing. Are we going to see Brandon Sproat or a McLean or Jonah Tong surprise us, and suddenly they're pitching important games late in the season for us? So I am curious to see about the young players, and then it's really, can Lindor get off to a good start this year? That's been a tough thing, the last couple of years. I want him to make an all-star game. He needs to make an all-star game as a Met, and he's, these slow starts haven't helped him. So, but I'm looking forward to everything.
Down in Port St. Lucie, we ran to John, I would say 5 times in like a span of 3 hours, just at different parts of the complex. One of the places was the team store, and John, show us the shirt.
All right.
You have the shirt?
I do have the shirt. I needed some fashion advice from the guys. So here we go here.
It's amazing.
Look at that thing.
Move this back a little bit further, see what we can see. Take that look there. But I don't know if I told you guys that it wasn't just the shirt that I bought. Also, one sec. Here we go.
We got a surprise here.
And the straw style hat.
I bought the hat. These were things that, again, encouragement from my daughter with those things. Those are not purchases that I make on my own. Those are purchases that are peer pressure kind of moments. But I have it, if I want to, sit down, it's a hot day and I want to have, a few Coronas, I know what I'm going to wear.
Family barbecues will never be the same with the Mets barbecue aesthetic. It's a 10 out of 10, John. We wanted to play a round of Mets Pod Mount Rushmore where you pick for us the 4 best Mets games you've attended to in person, especially since road games count. I'm sure you get to see them play in California a ton. So do you have your best 4 Mets games you've ever attended?
It's a tough question. I'm gonna try my best here. Number one, I'm not saying this is the number one game, but I would say the Todd Pratt home run game.
Oh, I mean,
I was at good. That game. That was a pretty special one. I was in college at the time, and I remember making the trip for that one. So that was a big one. I was there when the Mets beat the Dodgers in 2015 to make it to the next round. That was huge game. Just, to be there in person. I think we were down at the start of the game and we had a comeback there. And that's certainly on the list. I got to be celebrating amongst Mets fans in LA in a major way. I'm going to say I went to all the Mets games in LA during that series. So all of those would be sort of in the mix here. I did get to go to Mets Phillies in the playoffs this year. So I went to the 2 games in the Phillies in Philadelphia. So the win of those 2 games was the better of the 2 games, but they were both phenomenal experiences. A couple others that in my head, I was at Steven Matz's game in LA where I think it was one of his early starts and he hit a home run at the game as well. And I was also, I was at the JD Martinez game walk-off last year, the day after Grimace. Yeah, that's a huge one. That was one. Yeah. The thing about that game was the first 8 innings were just boring as hell, but it got great at the end of it. And it was part of the turning point. So I've had some good games. I think I was at a game where Syndergaard hit 2 home runs.
Yeah, that was a West Coast game. Yep,
that was an LA game. So I've had some good ones over the years.
One thing we'll do next week as part of our annual season preview is some predictions, and it's always fun to look back at and see how wrong Connor and I can often be. So now we'll let you have a crack at it, and we'll circle back this time next year with your predictions. Who is your surprise or breakout candidate for the Mets this year?
Breakout candidate for the Mets. Ooh.
And give us a win total too while you're at it.
Okay, win total. I'm going to say we're going to win 93 games this year. So that's, I'm putting us in the playoffs, and we'll see if I'm being conservative or if it's a disaster. We'll find out. And then in terms of breakout player this year, I'm going to say that David Peterson is going to have a really good year. I know he already had a good year last year, but it wasn't a complete season. I'm going to say that he's going to have a full season and be the guy that we saw last year. So I think I don't know if that's a breakout enough. I mean, I could add another name to the mix if need be, but that's one that I'm thinking.
We'll side with you on that one, John. We love Peterson on this podcast, and we think he's ready for kind of that, to put it all together. It's been kind of halves for Peterson, it feels like, throughout his career. We're excited to watch him, and we really, really appreciate your time today. Of course, you could follow John on Twitter at Jon Hurwitz, a great follow for updates on everything he's working on behind the scenes, but of course, Mets stuff as well. John, before we say goodbye, anything you want to tease about any future projects upcoming? You don't have to. You can keep the curtain pulled in front, but it's up to you.
I wish I had something that I could publicly tease right now. There's a few things cooking, nothing that's been announced yet, But, as of right now, I would just say, if you haven't seen Cobra Kai yet, you're in for a treat because you should start right now. If you like Karate Kid even a little bit, then you're going to love the show.
The great Jon Hurwitz, and a great Mets fan as that. Thank you so much, John. We appreciate the time.
My pleasure. Anytime.
Great stuff from Jon Hurwitz, Joe, who we saw him down at Port St. Lucie. He is as diehard as they come in terms of being a Mets fan. Just the games that he's been to. I don't know about you, but I'm not brave enough to go to a game at Philadelphia in the playoffs. Maybe during the regular season, but during the playoffs, I think I'll stay from the comfort of New York for that.
I've been to one at Philadelphia. It was a regular season game. David Wright hit the game-winning home run, and I was sitting with the 7 line. So I had like 2,000 people. If anyone had a problem with me, there was enough people, I think, that would have my back. But Connor, when you think about, there's so many celebrities that are sports fans, and they like this team or like that team, and it's, very surface level. You could tell after us meeting John and meeting John's family, diehards. He mentioned like his daughter came up and asked us about Brandon Sproat at the live show. So just real Mets fan, and obviously has done such amazing stuff in movies and TV, and everyone just go check out Cobra Kai and all the stuff that we talked about.
You're listening to the Mets Pod presented by Tri-State Cadillac. Subscribe to the Mets Pod at Apple Podcasts, Spotify, SMY's YouTube channel, or wherever you get your podcast. All right, let's go down on the farm as we always do. And what better week to do that with the Spring Breakout game this Sunday on SMY featuring our very own Joe DeMayo. Jody, behind the scenes action. It felt like you, Jim, and Steve had been in the booth for 80 games before that. I loved it. I think the fans really loved it. You guys flowed really well together. The information about all the prospects and the lineup was great for you. Like, I don't think you could have asked for a much better lineup in terms of players that you got to watch and that they produced. But walk me through just how the entire experience was.
It's cool to just see how smooth of an operation SNY runs. And
it's amazing.
I'm in the podcast world, and, I've done a couple hits on Baseball Night in New York, but that's just me sitting in this chair and they send me a Zoom link and I hop on. But just seeing how seamless it is was very impressive. And have to give all the love to Steve Gelbs, who such a pro and knows how to really just drive that ship, and calling a baseball game from a monitor.
Oh man,
as seamlessly as he did. And it could be a problem for a lot of people, but Steve really nailed it. And having a guy like Jim Duquette on my side, who's been an executive in baseball for over 20 years, knows everybody in the sport, and, a little behind the scenes before that, Jim called me a couple days before the game and was like, "Hey, Joe, do you have info on a couple of these pitchers?" I was like, "Well, Jim, I got info on every single player in the game. So what do you need?" And it turned from him asking about 2 pitchers, just, stuff profiles and things like that, to us just talking baseball for 50 minutes. And as you know, and everyone listening to this knows, I can talk. So you put me next to Jim, and then you have Steve driving the bus. It made it very easy for me for my TV debut.
Yeah, you guys were great. You just flowed together really well. Nobody was trying to eat too much airtime at once. It was just perfect balance. And when you brought it up, like you have a point guard like Gelbs, who it's amazing to do. I couldn't imagine doing that many roles, like just jumping into play-by-play. And like you said, Joe, you barely noticed that it was being called off a monitor. The only time I was laughing, and you guys had fun with it, I think it was Carson Benj took second on kind of an in-between. Yeah. Like it looked like it had a shot at 2, but you never know in the breakout game. Is he going to kind of go 120 miles an hour and try to take second? And then when it cut to him sliding into second, you guys were like, and he did take second, and having a laugh about it. It was a really, really good time. But about the actual game, what stood out to you? I mean, there was a lot of big moments. Just the power Clifford has is jaw-dropping to me. And we talk about this guy on the podcast, it feels like every single month. But that was a big moment. But I felt like the game was full of them.
Clifford jumping on a lefty fastball, 93 miles an hour, and lefty has given Clifford some trouble in the past, and just taking that ball straight away center. It was 106 off the bat and 449 feet. And if they had a little bit more of a zoomed out camera, I'd love to know how close it was to clearing the batter's eye. Like, that was a clear no doubter. What also stood out to me was all of the pitchers that got into the game. The Mets are building, and we talk about it on the show pretty often, a bit of a pitching factory. And now you have guys throwing some gas. Jonah Tong yesterday topped at 98.5. And in these parts, we round up. So Jonah Tong touched 99 miles an hour in my eyes. And last year, Jonah was topping at 95. And this spring, he's been more averaging that 94 to 96, touching 97. So this was actually a career high in any kind of format for Jonah as far as velocity. Jonathan Pintaro came in, the player signed out of independent ball, topped at 96 and showed some really good breaking stuff. Dylan Ross, coming off of Tommy John surgery, touched 100 miles an hour. Jonathan Santucci, last year's second-round pick, touched 97. And Mr. Eggs himself, Ryan Lambert, touched 99 miles an hour and had on his last fastball 99 with 23 inches of induced vertical break, which is that kind of ride on the pitch. We talked about that a little bit on the broadcast. If you look back at Major League Baseball last year, there was only one fastball thrown that mirrored that velocity and induced vertical break, and it was by Robert Suarez of the Padres. So just all around some special velocity and stuff from the pitching staff.
Yeah, it's clear that there's clearly legitimate development going on behind the scenes with the Mets at a rate that I'm not accustomed to seeing. Like we've seen guys get into a system and fly through different levels, but the volume of it right now, Joe, is what stands out to me, where it's not just, hey, look at Brandon Sproat fly through the system. You have these, like you said, you have guys coming from independent ball that are finding a different weapon in their arsenal. Or Jonah Tong, who's listed 6'1", 180, and now his velocity is creeping towards triple digits. I mean, that's out of this world for a guy that wasn't taken in the first, second, or third round. So that was definitely, when watching the game, because you and I, we talk about so many of these guys week after week, but in a game where you're going to see that quantity of prospects, it was pretty cool to see, the deeper part of the system kind of get some shine, not just a first round pick like Benj, a guy with a lot of hype like Jet, even Clifford, who has developed a lot of hype because he's one of the prospects in the system that just has so much raw power. So I think the spring breakout game lived up to just about all the expectations you could have had for it. And once again, you guys did such a good job covering it, and a shout out to SMY for, really embracing an aspect of the sport that people want more coverage of. I mean, honestly, you see it across every single sport. Obviously, I do the NFL draft full time over at NBC. I know the NBA draft and NHL drafts are very popular. Now you're just seeing the overall farm systems of baseball, because you have the draft, which is high school and college players, and the international signing period grow so much popularity in the sport. And I think, Joe, for you, that just had to feel amazing, as somebody who you've jokingly said, like, when I was a kid, it was like you try to find information on message boards about prospects, and now you're doing it, for a network that literally is the affiliated network of the New York Mets.
It was definitely surreal, Connor. And when I got home last night, I sat down in bed, started to watch some of it before going to sleep, because I was like, I have to just see a little bit of it. And it really hit me. This whole thing started, I just made a Twitter account and a blog because I wanted to talk about Mets prospects. And when I first started, I said it on the broadcast at the end last night that at times it felt like I was talking to a wall. There was very little interest, and now they have a whole series about just highlighting prospects, and the interest, developing a following based on just me talking about Mets minor league prospects specifically. Definitely surreal to turn what was just something that I was interested in, wanted an outlet to talk about it. So I made a Twitter account, to being able to broadcast a Mets prospect-based game on SNY. I don't think you could have convinced, 20-year-old Joe that this is where my life would be, but here we are, and I'm very grateful for it.
And if you enjoyed the spring breakout game, stick with us all year, because we follow and track the performance of players in the Mets system at every single level, all the way down to low A ball, obviously all the way up to Syracuse. So we're going to have it covered on Down on the Farm every single week. And if you want, you could send in mailbag questions about any of these guys. Our mailbag segment's not just limited to the pro team. And with that, we'll kick off the mailbag segment of the week with a question from Jimenez701. This is from YouTube. Thank you, Jimenez. Everyone is talking about pitch shapes. Can you guys break it down or explain it? to us, Joe. So this has become a common description with a lot of prospects and guys in the system, really just when describing stuff. Joe, how would you explain pitch shape?
To try to put it in simple, like congestible, I think is a word, to put in
digestible is what you're looking for.
Digestible terms. That's the word. But to put it in those terms, I think often we just resort to velocity, right? Where it's just like, this guy throws 97, so he has a plus fastball. Shape is the pitch metrics on any given offering. That's spin rate, that is vertical break, horizontal break, that is essentially how the pitch looks to the hitter as it's coming. Because if you throw a 98 mile an hour fastball that looks straight as an arrow and stays on the plane that the hitters see it coming from, they have a much better chance to, make an impact on the baseball. But if you throw 95, but you're able to get that ride on it and that induced vertical break, it'll give the illusion as if it's rising and hitters will end up swinging underneath it. Or if you want to talk about like a gyro slider that gets negative vertical break, where that's a ball that goes down, it appears that it's coming and then it just drops off the table and you swing over it. So that's just the best, easiest way I think to describe pitch shape is how these pitchers manipulate the baseball to give a different illusion in a way of what pitch is coming their way.
Yeah, I think that's a great way of describing it. Just pitching is so complex, right? I think for fans, it's easy to look at the radar gun on the scorebug and look at that as the be all end all. But when the reality is, when you hear hitters talk, sometimes it's the way pitchers hide the ball, release point. You have some of these guys that are 6'7", which means they most likely have a really, really long wingspan. And that, you kind of mentioned this, Joe, that release point to the plate can also change really how much hitter has, right?
Extension, right?
Exactly, the extension.
So how close they get to the plate.
There is so much data involved in pitching right now, and shape is kind of just another piece of the puzzle. And pitching has really become a science. So when you look across sports, it has truly become a science in how it's scouted and, most importantly, how it's developed. Our next question is from Bavarian Mets fan at the Bavarian Guy 7 on Twitter. Who do you see as the biggest riser that's not a top 10 prospect that will get people talking by season's end?
I'm going to go with a guy that was in the futures game yesterday, Boston Barrow, who I had number 13 in my most recent top 30. He's lauded for his plate discipline, his bat the ball skills, his knowledge of the strike zone. And I was told that at the same age, he was reminiscent as a hitter like Brandon Nimmo. I was told that before the game. And then the game comes on, and the dude has like the exact same batting stance as Brandon Nimmo. So I guess that was an apt comparison of sorts. But what impressed me about him, the Mets want to see him tap into some more power. And you saw him, much like Clifford, against lefty, take a 93 mile an hour fastball the other way for a home run. Next at bat, a lefty again, pulls a 94 mile an hour fastball through the hole for a single. And then in his following at bat, the way the wind was blowing, he hit a ball that I thought was a surefire ball going out of the park again to right field, but the wind pulled it back in and ended up being about a warning track shot. So Barrow's a guy that I would keep a close eye on. I have him at number 13. And if he takes the strides that the Mets are expecting of him, I think he's someone that's going to fly up my list. And you could be talking a top 5 prospect in the system this time next year.
Yeah, it's easy to get excited about someone like that. When you look at a high school draft pick, he's gained a lot of weight. These are typically, Joe, the players that, I don't want to necessarily say like a meteoric rise, but it feels like you blink and 2 years go by and you go, wow, I couldn't project that, because you don't know how guys, when they're drafted out of high school, are going to grow, what areas that might have been lacking they're going to develop. Seeing Barrow hit that home run, it was kind of a wow moment for everybody. I could feel it with you guys in the booth. You guys were excited to see him play, but when he did that for you guys, Joe, it felt like, just watching the game, you guys were like, oh, that is exactly what the Mets are hoping for this year.
I had to be very careful. I was excited. I was about to hit my pen on the desk, but I didn't want the mic to pick that up. So I was pretty pumped to see it because you could tell he hit it well, but it was tough to tell if it was going to make it out. And then obviously it did. And it was very exciting to see someone like Barrow, who the Mets really, really want to see get into not necessarily home run power like he showed yesterday, but get some doubles, spray liners in the gap. If he could get there, and then as you continue to grow and mature as a hitter, those line drives that you're spraying gap to gap, all of a sudden just happen to travel over the fence.
Joe, I'll take someone that was in your top 30, but not in the top 10 as the question to ask. And kind of excited to watch Jonathan Santucci this year. And obviously he's not going to be, projected to make the major leagues this year, but second round pick, someone that you've just talked about, really the stuff that he has, and it's been all about health for him. And when you just look at the overall talent that he has that just needs tailoring, I'm just a believer now when the Mets draft somebody with that kind of stuff profile, whether it's the velocity on the fastball or the ability with the breaking ball. And hey, can we get this guy's command from being below average to mediocre to average? Let's see what we have here. I really want to see what Santucci could do in this system with a full year under his belt.
I think you can. This is an incredibly smart kid. Obviously went to Duke, so you're not cheating academics over at Duke. So very smart kid. The fastball, like I said, was up to 97 yesterday. He has a plus slider. He's got a changeup that he's working on. And we've talked about this on this show, right? How at the pitching lab and all the work that can be done, you could develop a pitch in just a mere few bullpen sessions that you could use in game. And that's what Santucci did. He has a curveball now added to his arsenal. And he told the media before the game that he learned it in like 3 or 4 bullpen sessions. And now all of a sudden he was able to use it during the game last night. So he has the potential for a 4-pitch mix, physical body. And when you look at his delivery, it's easy, it's repeatable. It's a starting pitcher's delivery. As you said, the command and control will definitely need to be cleaned up, but this is a guy that missed some time in college too. He had a fracture in his elbow his sophomore year, had a rib injury that knocked him out for a month and a half his junior year. So it's pitching is almost new to him, essentially, as you remember, Connor, when we talked about him after he got drafted. He was a two-way player up until his last year at Duke. So this is newly focused on pitching, exciting prospect that the Mets probably would have taken if they had a later first-round pick and Benj was off the board. I think Santucci would have been in play at a spot more along those lines, and they're able to get him in the second round.
All right, before we sign off here, next week, obviously, it's time. Our annual season preview, predictions. It's probably one of the more fun shows of the year, Joe, strictly with how it ages. It's the one time of the year where I think we're not afraid to go bold. We'll put ourselves out there, and baseball is an extremely unpredictable game where 2 months later you can kind of look back and laugh. You don't even need the full season all the time, but it's one of the best shows of the year. We have a pretty big surprise in store as well. So if you're not subscribed to the Mets Pod, please, I mean, you know what to do at this point. You'll never miss a show. Joe, any closing thoughts as we're kind of getting to the end of spring training here? It's unbelievable how quick everything really goes.
I'm ready for opening day. Like I've enjoyed spring training. And I love seeing guys like Dedniel Nunez come back during Monday's game and AJ Minter back in action. But I'm ready for real baseball. Let's get to Houston and let's get this show on the road.
This is the Mets Pod presented by Tri-State Cadillac. Spring is the season for new beginnings, and it's the best time to get behind the wheel of a sophisticated new Cadillac SUV. The beginning of something exceptional starts now. Visit your Tri-State Cadillac dealer, and remember to subscribe to the show at Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Leave us a review with a question. Of course, we'll look for it for a future mailbag. And of course, you can watch every episode of the show on SMY's YouTube channel, so become a subscriber over there as well. Thank you to the great Jon Hurwitz for jumping on and talking Mets with us. Thanks so much to everybody that listens each week, and we will talk to you soon.